Yes, so thank you. Welcome, Justin, to the podcast, to my podcast.
Thanks,
Um,
Kristen.
yeah, I've been so looking forward to our talk today, to our conversation, since I met you at the trip to the Reiki lineage and history trip to Japan in October 24. So try to make this a little official. I'm going to try to follow protocol.
Okay,
That since there are probably going to be some listeners from my audience that doesn't know about you.
sure.
So I'm going to start out by reading your bio shortly so that people get an idea about who you are, and then we will continue from there. So, Justin Stein is the chair of Asian Studies program at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, Canada. He has a PhD in the study of religion from the University of Toronto and has written extensively about the history of Reiki, including his book Alternate Currents: Reiki's Circulation in the 20th Century North Pacific, which was published in 2023 by the University of Hawaii Press. And I got to know about you from a colleague in the US, Pamela Miles, who said, you should listen to this guy, Justin. He's doing some research on Reiki. And I thought she was a bit annoying because why would I need research? Reiki was there, Reiki was all we needed, right? And then
Mhm.
I started following you on Facebook. And then suddenly one day there was a little post saying, my next trip to Japan is out. Text me if you're interested. And here we are today because I did, and I went to Japan with you, and I had a wonderful experience. And now we're here.
It was wonderful to have you there, to meet you there, and to share all that together. And yeah, thanks for having me. I think as the first English language interview of this season two of the
Yes,
podcast.
season two. It's true.
What an
The
honor.
Reiki, the Reiki podcast is in Danish. It's called Reiki Lys Læring. So that's Reiki Life, Light, and Learning, or
Okay.
teaching. That's like the very fluent in English title. Yes, season two, and you are number one. So this is amazing. Yay! And the book mentioned in your bio is this one, Alternate Currents, which I, of course, read almost completely before Japan, and then afterwards I finished it. And we are going to be talking a bit about the book and your work. But first of all, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about how did you ever get involved with Reiki? What is your Reiki story?
Sure. I'll try to keep it fairly brief, although open to any follow-up questions. But yeah, so I grew up, my mother is very into spirituality and various kinds of what you might call alternative healing modalities. And so, learning to meditate from a young age, practicing a little bit of yoga, going to a kind of healer who could speak to our higher self. And so I was exposed to a lot of these different things from an elementary school kind of age. And then in college, I became initiated into a different type of kind of energy healing called spiritual human yoga that works on the chakras. And I talk about this a little bit in the introduction to the book as well. But I went to this big meeting with the master of that practice, and it was quite cultish, to use the phrase. It was the master told us that basically anytime we had any problem, we should look inside ourselves for a still small voice, and that would be his voice, and that he could telepathically guide us through any problems that we had. And I was like, oh, I'm in a cult. I didn't realize. And so, on the one hand, the energy I was feeling from the meditations and the healing practice, where we would use our fingertips on someone's kind of spine. Um, I was feeling amazing things. I was experiencing incredible results with the healing practice. But at the same time, I was feeling like maybe energy could be used also maybe to manipulate people, or there was some kind of, I don't know, two sides to this energy practice. And so that got me very interested to study it from an academic perspective. And so when I finished my undergraduate, I applied for, or in the final years of my undergraduate, I applied for and received a fellowship to go around the world learning about different types of energy healing. And my research question at that point was about money and was about because I was interested in power and manipulation and exploitation. And so I was looking at certain types of energy healing that were being practiced out of like a religious uh, obligation or a calling as part of these different new religious movements. I don't know if you've heard of Jo Rei, but Jo Rei is another type of healing that came out of Japan around the same time as Reiki and is part of a church. And they don't practice for money, although you can make a contribution to the church. The people who do Jo Rei do it out of as a religious practice, and as opposed to something like Reiki, maybe where it is more professionalized. And so that was my original kind of research question. And as part of that research, I became initiated into Reiki in India, where Reiki at that time, this was in 2001, 2002. I don't know it's as popular now as it was back then, but back then it was so popular. There was Reiki everywhere in India. And so, although my Reiki master was actually Israeli, so it's very international. Yeah, as you know, Reiki is this global kind of thing. And so I was part of that kind of from the beginning. And I was also initiated into doing Jo Rei and practiced that for a while. And so I got experience doing different kinds of Qigong, doing different kinds of Kundalini yoga, and got experience doing all these different types of practices. Then I went back to New York for a while and was teaching as a school teacher, but it was always kind of in the back of my, and I practiced, my own kind of energy healing that I think took some stuff from Reiki, but also was integrating some of the other things I had learned. And I was doing that for a while. But it was always kind of in the back of my head about what if I went back to grad school and kept doing this research. And so originally when I started my master's program at the University of Hawaii, I was interested in, again, doing this kind of comparative work between Reiki and Jo Rei. But my supervisor told me, she said, it's too much for a master's program. To do a master's thesis on this comparative thing, focus on one practice. Don't try to be doing this comparative work. And so there had already been more written about Jo Rei and some of its other this other thing called Okiome that's related to Jo Rei. But there hadn't been much written from an academic perspective on Reiki. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'll write about Reiki. And then if I'm going to write about it, then I need to start practicing Reiki more seriously as Reiki, not as a mishmash of all the different things I've learned. And after my master's program, I went into a PhD program at the University of Toronto and specifically interested in Hawaii Takata. And so then it's like, okay, well, then I shouldn't just be practicing Reiki. I should really try to be practicing Reiki as Hawaii Takata taught it. And so I really got focused on self-treatment every day, doing the foundation treatment as best I can, as long as I have time. If I don't have time for the full, whatever hour, maybe, at least doing each hand position for a little bit and working on myself. And yeah, I guess, and then that turned into me writing this book and being part of the global Reiki community, learning about the history of Reiki, and
The
so
rest
I
is
think that brings us.
history.
Yeah, sorry. I said I would keep it short, but maybe it wasn't that short.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's beautiful. It's always, it's in the tradition, like asking people, so what is your Reiki story, right? And it's always interesting to hear what happened and how I find that usually there is somewhere along the way where Reiki kind of like takes over or pushes us in a certain direction that perhaps we hadn't seen from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I
actually, if
call
we could, I know you had mentioned in the questions about Phyllis, and I think actually this is a good transition about like the how Reiki like works through us.
yes.
So can I go on to that next
Yes,
question you
please.
had about
Please.
working with Phyllis Furomoto? So it's funny because there are, in all of our lives, right? There's things that we make our own decisions, and then there's kind of decisions that are like made for us, right? And there's this kind of like push and pull between how much control do we actually have over things. Um, but reaching out to Phyllis Furomoto was something that in my master's program, a number of different Reiki people I worked with in Hawaii were saying, you need to talk to Phyllis. You need to talk to Phyllis. But I never felt ready.
Mm.
And so I never reach out. I, I need to get my question. What if I only have one shot to talk to her? I
The
need to make sure I have
grandmaster, right?
yeah, that she's the
Yeah.
lineage bearer and I was also worried that she wouldn't like the fact that I was doing this research. There
And
was a
the,
lot of things.
and the research were for the masters first and then for the book, right?
Yeah, well, first it was the master's thesis, then the doctoral thesis, and then which became the book. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, Yeah, and so, and you know what? Maybe some of my intuition, maybe she wasn't ready to talk to me as well. Because by the time we did end up talking, I think there was a reason for it in a sense. Because so in 2012, I think, out of the blue, without me asking him to, Yoyan Yonker, who was also doing his PhD on the history of Reiki, you know, made an introduction email between me and Phyllis. Phyllis, there's this young man who I think you need to meet who is doing very interesting work. And so we had some kind of email back and forth. And well, she told me, okay, before you interview me, for your research, I want to interview you for my radio show. And so I was very nervous because it felt like if I mess up the interview, maybe she won't talk to me. Maybe, it was this very like kind of high pressure moment. This is like over a decade ago now. This is like in 2013.
Okay.
And we spoke, and I felt like she held her cards very close to her chest during the interview. And it was over Skype, it's kind of like we're talking right now, where it's you can see each other, but you don't get all the energy in the room, right? You don't know what someone's thinking or feeling necessarily. And she asked me questions and kept very, kind of
Phyllis. As she was at that point or that time.
yeah, her demeanor was let's say guarded maybe a little bit and sounded maybe a little critical with some of the questions and I just answered as best I could as a graduate student and then it ended, and she's like, at the sign off, this has been Balancing Form and Essence with Phyllis Furumoto. And she stopped the recording. And then she goes, well, that was fun. And I was like shocked. I couldn't believe it. And what she said to me then, and I think it's, this thing you were saying about, Reiki working through us or having plans for us that we don't necessarily have ourselves. And what she said is, the kinds of questions you're asking and the kinds of things you're interested in about how the practice maybe have changed over time, how it was adapted for different audiences, these are things that I'm not interested in at all. That for me, my role is to hold this space that I received from my grandmother, that my grandmother taught the practice in a particular way. I received it in that way. I'm just trying to hold that space as best I can. And so I'm not interested in those questions that you're asking. But I know there are a lot of people in the Reiki world who are. And I think that you're someone who is well situated, who has the natural aptitudes and connections and has been working hard on this kind of stuff already, that maybe you could be someone who's helpful to those people. And so because of that, I want to help you on your journey, however I can help you. And at the same time, she had, in a sense, this like burden of all these materials. It's a treasure and a burden in a sense, where she had these boxes and boxes of her grandmother's papers, the Hawaii Takata, what's now the Hawaii Takata papers at the University of California, Santa Barbara. It's been archived there. But at the time, they were just boxes in her storage unit. And, she had her cancer diagnosis. She was in remission at the time. This is like 2013, 2014. Um, but she knew, she wasn't going to be around forever. But at the same time, she wanted the Reiki community, the global Reiki community, to be able to access these materials in some way, but wasn't really sure how that was going to work. She wasn't even really sure what was in the boxes. She said for her to go through all that stuff was incredibly draining for her in a sense. And so she saw that we could have this kind of reciprocal relationship where she could help me with my research while I'm also helping her to organize, go through the stuff and figure out how best to make it available to the public, to the Reiki community. And
Wonderful. Because then you
yeah,
would be
so we
like, it would be balanced because you would be helping each other, right?
exactly, exactly. And so that really became the basis of our relationship. And so I flew out to Arizona a few times, worked with her and Joyce, her partner, Paul and Susan Mitchell. Robert Fuston was also a big part of that project. And yeah, we went through everything, organized it, alphabetized, systematized, digitized, put things in folders and binders and originally it was maybe they were thinking about opening a center, the Reiki Home Center there, but that idea didn't end up working out, and we decided a university archive would be a good place where we would have professionals who are taking care of it in perpetuity, right? There's people who know how to manage the access, who are keeping it in a climate controlled,
Yes,
humidity
yes.
controlled, right? And so hopefully, these materials will be at that university, for time immemorial and they're open to the public. So yeah,
Oh.
it's great.
But for listening to this, and I met Phyllis a couple of times at some conferences, and she visited Denmark on a couple of occasions as well. Um, but it's kind of like, oh my God, he was so close.
No, I mean, and we became friends. When I started my postdoc in Kyoto, Phyllis was teaching there, and I stayed at her house. She opened up her home to me. We went on a big road trip together. She came back, I think, on her last trip to Japan.
Mhm.
She and Joyce and I went on this big road trip because I could speak Japanese, and so it was like the three of us in a little car driving on the Japanese coast. I mean, we became friends through the research, and it was yeah,
But I
it
like
was a
that. I like
real
that story.
honor.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Because
and I think also, but she was at a point in her life where I think, again, even though she wasn't wanting to know everything about the history of the minutia of the history of Reiki, which is the stuff that I get excited about. Um, she was at this point where she was trying to think about Reiki as a spiritual practice. And so she actually attended the International Association for the History of Religions conference in Erfurt, Germany in 2015 and met some of my scholarly mentors and scholarly colleagues. And we all went out for a dinner together. And shortly thereafter, she released a couple of videos on YouTube about Reiki as a spiritual practice. And she talks about learning from the religious studies scholarship community at this conference. And so it's really interesting the kind of interplay between us in
hmm,
those
lovely.
kind of last 5 years of her life. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but it's nice to have these stories from you. Because I went at the last conference that Phyllis attended in Canada in 2018. She stood up and made not a speech, but she made a talk. And I was a brand new Reiki master. Well, it was my first conference. I've been a master for 2 years. I was like, oh, this is this is the grandmaster speaking. She's almost like holy. And I remember having this sense that I was witnessing history
Yeah.
in the making. And
Yeah.
what really struck me was that she talked about how she had to be human, Reiki master, and grandmaster.
Mhm.
And those three different roles, sometimes that would have been easier than other times to combine and where am I and who am I? And
Right.
for a lot of people in the Reiki community who, like in Europe, were a little further away or didn't attend the conferences or so, Phyllis was a very distant person, right? She was really the grandmaster on top of the pyramid. And you were also a little afraid of her, right? And I just love when we get these stories where we get to the human behind the grandmaster, because
Uh,
that was such a big part of it as well.
Well, it's
And
interesting, speaking with her, you could even see her oscillate between those roles sometimes in the same story where she would refer, oh, my grandmother used to say blah blah blah. My Reiki master, Hawayo Takata, always said, right, in the
Yeah.
same, because
Yeah.
she would be moving between these different layers, like you said, or these different personae in a sense. And that she has different responsibilities. And there's times where I remember asking her a question and she would stop and reflect before answering. I think because she knew she wasn't just talking to a friend, but that because I'm a researcher and because her words might, live
Yes.
on as a
Yes.
in the archive, that she has a responsibility to her grandmother, her Reiki master, to the global Reiki community, right? To the lineage, right? And so I think there's a lot of responsibility there. Um, and I think she felt that very keenly. And yeah, she really wanted to do, I mean, I think people might question certain choices that, all of these people made at different points in their lives. But I think a lot of it came from wanting to do the right thing by the lineage,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
trying to honor what she received and make sure that she passes it along with integrity. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. And I think that's what we are taught as masters. And I'm Reiki Alliance master, right? I'm in the Takata lineage. My master, Hanne Fritzberger, was initiated by a lady called Birgit Steffensen, who's still alive, but who was the first Danish master. And Birgit was initiated by Phyllis. So we have a very close or very short span going to Mrs. Takata, and always been this saying about that you have to teach the way you were taught by your master, because that's
Right,
how we bring it forward, right?
right.
And what I really enjoyed about reading the book, the the book, even though I said we're not going to talk about the book all the time, but we're not. But anyway, so I always felt personally this connection to Takata and to her teachings as I understood them.
Mhm.
My master passed a couple of years ago, and we had a very close relationship, but she was my master, right? And there was just some things I didn't dare ask her because I was like, no, this is like being I'm going to be impolite asking her these questions. And then suddenly she wasn't there anymore. And that should teach you always ask the questions, right? While the master is still alive.
Mhm.
But the things about Mrs. Takata, her way of bringing Reiki out in the world, and specifically to the US, I think that's an important part of the story.
Yeah,
And when I started hearing about you and your work, and I was, as I said in the beginning, I was like, but I don't need to know the truth.
right.
It's not important for me to. I know that the Reiki story that I share in my first degree Reiki is not the truth. It's a
Mm,
story. It's a myth
mhm,
that helps the student get into the mood and start thinking about stuff. And do I really need to know the truth?
right.
And
Yeah.
then I read the book and I was so happy because a lot of my own thoughts about why do we teach it like this, or why has this been changed, or why do we say this, was confirmed by reading what you found out from the archive, from Mrs. Takata's notes, and from talking to Phyllis and everything. And especially this about, of course, Mrs. Takata had to somehow change or alter the Japanese Reiki tradition in order to make it accepted in the US. I mean, obviously, she was a Japanese woman after Second World War. And I think that explains a lot. And that's fine with me, right? Because
Mhm.
it had a higher purpose. Um, but then traveling to Japan with you.
Oh, can I just say a
Yes,
couple of things about
yes.
a few things you said made me like ding ding ding, but also two things. One is um, also part of the book, part of my goal, and I think something that a few readers have told me as well, is what we were talking about before about Hawayo Takata, right? Again, seen as this like holy figure in a sense, was also a human being, right? And the real like part of my goal in the book was really to humanize her and help fill out a lot of the um, personal story which helped inform a lot of the choices she ended up making as a teacher, right? And the ways that her interactions with her students affected her and affected her teaching practice. And I think alongside that is that some of the things that she introduced to the practice that I think she's, has been criticized for by, people from other lineages sometimes. Um, like, for example, cha making changes to the precepts, right? Adding a precept about honor your parents, your
Yes.
teachers, and your elders.
Yes.
Um, oh, well, then she just wanted to have authority. She didn't want her students to question her. But at
Yes.
the same time, right, what I argue in that last chapter is I think she was trying, in some sense, to make her American students more like Japanese students. And so she said, Japanese students don't need to be told, honor your teachers, right? That's something that's just so ingrained in them from an early age. And it's funny because in her story, in her life story, in Japan, she was Japanese American, right? So she is kind of, between worlds, has exposure to both cultures. But in Japan, she's just American. And there's this story about that they got fed up with her asking so many questions during her
Yes.
classes,
Yes.
and
Yes. True.
and someone pulls her aside and says, "Listen, if you want questions, ask me the questions. Don't ask them to Hayashi Sensei. It's rude. You can't be asking so many questions. You Americans are like believe in democracy. This is not democracy, right? And so there's like that her experience as a student in Japan kind of being disciplined for being too inquisitive and questioning. And then she kind of ends up fulfilling that same role for her students, right? Where, especially you think about her teaching in the 1970s in America, I mean, it had all these hippies,
Yeah.
interested in energy and what, and then so she's like, no, no more questions. It's just, do it the way that I'm telling you, and you'll learn. Reiki will teach you. Just, kind of have this faith that if you follow my directions and listen to your hands, Reiki will teach you.
Yes.
And um, so I think that she, in a sense, was trying her best not just to adapt Reiki to the Americans, but adapt the Americans to Reiki, right? And that some of the changes that she made were what I call like the Japanization of Reiki, in a sense, right? That like adding these things to make their students more Japanese or in certain ways as well. And then the other thing, the last thing I wanted to say was the thing you said about like, what do I need to read this book for? Like, I already have Reiki, like I have it all. That was one of my favorite moments in the whole. I don't think this is in the book. In the whole experience was like the night before Phyllis and I started opening up all the boxes. We had like lugged them into this little space and we had set up folding tables and Phyllis, Joyce, and I were having dinner, I think the night before Paul and everyone else arrived. And Joyce said, the best thing about, this whole project? I said, what's that? She said, no matter what's in those boxes, no matter what we find in there, Reiki is going to work exactly the same way. It's like, tomorrow that it did yesterday.
Yes. Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I
It's
love that line.
that's nice. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. And what I just noticed when you're talking now, you said this, you use this phrase like Reiki will teach you, right?
Mm,
And I find it fascinating how certain things have been passed on from master to master, from one continent to another continent, right? Because this sentence in Danish, my master would con all the classes, students would be, but, and she would go, let Reiki teach you,
mm,
practice and Reiki will teach you.
yeah.
And I love that. And then you say these precise words, right?
Well, it's because it's from Takata, right?
Yeah, exactly,
That's what she said.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I like that phrasing though, let Reiki teach you, because
yes,
it's you have to actually actively allow it, right? It's like
yes,
opening yourself up.
very important, right? But before I say something to that, I was also reminded of a quote I have from Phyllis from one of the times she visited Denmark, and she says, "The master should not give the student all the answers." And I love that. And
Mhm.
sometimes at a class with some very eager students, I will take out my notebook and I will say, I have this quote from Phyllis Lei Furomoto, and I will read it out loud, and they will look at me like, you were so annoying. Yeah, but it's when we allow to be in Reiki, to be silent and not trying to figure everything out and just be there and just practice, right?
Yeah.
Then we will eventually know, won't we? Some of it anyway. Yeah.
Some of it. I think that's the thing is though, there's like some of it that remains mystery, and that's okay. And like
Yes.
being
Yes.
okay with that there are things that exceed human knowledge and understanding, I think that's also part of the practice, right? That's part of what you learn.
We
Yeah.
can't explain everything, and I don't think we should explain everything. And I also believe that, for instance, like Reiki and research, there's not that much research done on Reiki because that's not where the money is probably, right? So people don't really want to do it. And then again, the tools, the research tools we have in this time, I don't think they're sufficient enough to actually prove what Reiki is. So it will always be kind of like a failure or not very successful research anyway. And the only thing I ever done was a while back, years back, I took part in a TV program for National Danish TV about healing modalities. And this guy he wanted to, let's see if we can prove that something happens in the human body. So he had some arrangements done with the National Hospital and doctor and all. We're going to test, and so there are going to be some patients, and they were going to be all wired up, and I was going to give them Reiki, and they were going to, can we measure something, right? And the doctor in charge wasn't really interested in asking me what would be an idea to look for. It was just like, no, 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 I know what I'm going to do. I was like, okay, a little bit annoying. Maybe I could recommend something for you since I am the master working with this. But anyway, what we could prove that he had to admit was that the pulse would drop five beats per minute while receiving Reiki.
Mm.
So, and it was like, but that doesn't really matter, he said, actually, which I'm like, oh my God. So anyway, so I know that, of course, we know this already, but just having this we actually proved that when you're receiving Reiki, your pulse drops. That means that you go to the parasympathetic nervous system, and this is where your whole body can do its own work. But besides from that, it is rather difficult to prove that
Okay.
Reiki works because it's always so individual, right? To the one person to another. Because
Well, yeah, and the other problem is with the double blind, clinical research, the people who are supposed to be giving like fake Reiki, sham Reiki.
yeah,
I've heard about in studies where, they're just supposed to be putting their hands on, they've never received a Reiki initiation, and they're not supposed to be doing anything. And sometimes that works too.
it does.
And I've heard about, afterwards, the researchers talking with the people doing, fakie, and they said, well, I just thought, okay, well, I'll let the energy come out of my hand, or I'll let the universe work through me. And it's like, you're not supposed to be doing that. You're not supposed to be doing anything. You're just supposed to be putting your, and so, yeah, it's like if it is this kind of natural capacity that human beings have, and that the initiations or Reiju could kind of help strengthen our connection to the source and, put us into this initiation lineage where we're receiving this practice. But, my grandma would say, oh, I used to do Reiki years ago before anyone was talking about it. My kid would fall and hurt their knee. I put my hands on it, the hands would get hot, their knee would get hot, the knee would feel better. Maybe there is something. And so this whole idea of like the double blind clinical research is very hard to do with Reiki.
It
And
is.
also, obviously, the person giving it knows if it's real Reiki or not. So that you can't even do the double blind, right? You can only do single
I
blind
think they
studies.
did one in New York. They did with distant treatments,
Yeah,
and then they told people that they were so there was one group receiving distant Reiki and another one being told that they were receiving but were not.
right.
And they was with depression.
Mm.
So they received treatments for 6 weeks in a row. And they could see that the Reiki, those actually receiving Reiki, improved more than the others. And then, as far as I remember, they did a test 12 months later to see how are everyone now. And the Reiki patients were still much better off than
Oh,
the ones who thought they received Reiki. But
I haven't
anyway,
read that one. I might ask you for that if you
yeah,
have a file.
yeah, I will find the link for you. It's
Okay,
it's in there. I can't remember if it's PubMed or where it is, but I it is in there somewhere. Yeah.
cool.
But anyway, let's not get into all that boring research. Um, what fascinated me so much, or one of the things that really fascinated me when going to Japan and in the footsteps of Reiki with you as the guide, was that suddenly I was reminded, or I saw the similarities between my first healing modality or spiritual practice that had nothing to do with Reiki, but was from the from South America, from the Andean Mountains, from the Q'ero Indians, where you're very much where you're totally connected to Mother Nature, Father Sky. You connect with the above and below, and you heal yourself by connecting with this, and you can everything works from this. And it's all about honoring and balance and honoring everything that is living around you. And then you took us around different places, different temples, and started talking about these kind of Buddhism that I didn't know about. I think was it the Shinto, which is very much in
Shingon?
Shingon, which is more like nature. Everything
Oh,
is
Shinto is okay. Yeah, Shinto. Yeah, yeah.
yes, okay.
It's not Buddhism per se, but yeah, yeah. Shinto also is very nature oriented. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay. I was like, oh, there's all these different kinds of Buddhism. One of them
Yeah,
is
yeah,
nature. Yeah. So, but if we go back to Usui Sensei,
yeah.
who grew up in Tane in rural Japan. And which kind of Buddhism do you believe that he was what connected to?
Yeah, I mean, so his family, it seems, was what's called Jodo Shu, or Pure Land Buddhism, which has a particular relationship with the Buddha Amida, who is the Buddha of infinite light and infinite life.
Mm.
And is a connection actually with the mental emotional symbol and the Amida Buddha, where the symbol, I don't know if you want me to go into all this right now,
Yeah,
but
please, please, let's
okay,
hear.
okay.
I mean, I know there
So,
will be people listening who probably doesn't know about the symbols, and that's fine as long as we keep it in this way.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, well, actually, I want to back up for what, well, okay, let me do this first and then I'll go back also to what you were saying before. Um, so yeah, I think that there is an aspect of Reiki that is, in a sense, a kind of like secularized Buddhist practice where Usui Sensei, from what we know, was very well read. He seems to have studied many, many different types of sciences, history, medicine, psychology, but also different kinds of religious practices, different kinds of magic. I mean, that's what it says on his memorial stone in Tokyo, right? Is that he just was interested in everything. And his healing practice, I think, bears uh, influences from a number of different modalities. But one of them, I think, is very clearly from Japanese Buddhism, and particularly from in a sense, the idea of like non-duality, right? That we are not just ourselves, but we are also everything else on some level, right? That there is, and we are not just one thing or the other, but there's this like non-dual aspect where we are a part of everything and everything is a part of us. And that there's a number of different Buddhist practices to achieve that state. One of them being kind of sitting meditation or things like that. But one that seems to have influenced Reiki is the use of what are called in esoteric Buddhism. So it's not the school that Usui Sensei was born into, but I think something he studied at some point in his life, is this practice of like what's called like the three mysteries, which is the body, the speech, and the mind. And so when we do Reiki, and we, uh, you know, one of the things Mrs. Takata had to take out, I think, at some point was the prayer position. It's interesting because Reiki people kind of added it back in, I think, at some level. But to put your hands in prayer position, to kind of, and also it's well, not to say too much, but for anyone who's received a Reiki initiation, obviously it's part of the whole thing. But to put your hand in prayer position to receive from the cosmos, from the universe. Um, that in esoteric Buddhism, the universe is the body of a Buddha, is the body of Dainichi Nyorai, the great sun Buddha, in Sanskrit, Mahavairochana Buddha, um, that everything in the universe is part of the body of Dainichi Nyodai, right? The universe is the true body of this cosmic Buddha. That every sound in the universe is the preaching of Dainichi Nyodai, right? That the vibrations of sound is his voice in a sense. And all of our consciousness is part of the consciousness of Dainichi Nyodai. And so in Reiki, right, when there's that kind of sense of not being entirely in your body, but kind of allowing this fusion of the microcosm and the macrocosm, where you kind of stop being yourself a little bit and you just allow Reiki to be part of you. I think that this is, in a sense, part of this kind of esoteric practice of the interpenetration of the practitioner and this like cosmic Buddha or just the universe as it became secularized, right? And then for American audiences, right, Takata talks about it in terms of God power later in her life. And again, it's almost like a pantheistic idea, right? That there is this power that permeates everything in the universe, right? And she said, some people call it God, some people call it the Great Spirit. I call it Reiki because I received it from this Japanese practice. And also the two characters, Rei and Ki, I see them on the calligraphy behind you there. Um, there's a belief in some Japanese Reiki lineages that is the union of heaven and earth, right? You were talking about the
Ah,
shamanic
yes,
practice there.
yes.
So ten Rei, right? It's kind of the spirit of heaven, and Chi Ki is like the key of the earth, and that the human being, right, the practitioner, is where heaven and earth meet.
The
Where
channel that connects heaven and earth.
yeah, yeah. And
I
so and
love
that's a very East Asian idea. There's like this trinity, this three of the heaven, humanity, and the earth, right? And the humanity is like this mediator between the two in a sense. But yeah, it seems like it's not just from East Asia, but maybe a kind of universal belief or a very common belief around in different human societies. Um, but so to get back to the Buddhism thing though, so in esoteric Buddhism, there are initiations. You receive certain practices at certain levels of initiation. And we know in Reiki, right, there's a similar kind of pedagogical structure. And at the second degree of Reiki, you receive these symbols. And
yes.
the symbols have a graphic component, right, that can be traced with the hand.
Hmm.
They have a lexical, right, or phonemic component, right, that you kind of recite maybe quietly or in your head. And they have maybe for some people a visualization component as well. And that's exactly the three mysteries, right? The body, the speech, and the mind.
Yes.
And in esoteric practice, there's a practice called Kaji Kito. So Kaji is that interpenetration of the self and the Buddha, right? That there's this way where the energies one is using in Kaji Kito are not one's own, but they come from the Buddha world. And the Kito is basically kind of like a prayer. And so in Kaji Kito, which is a Japanese practice, the practitioner can empower either the body of someone who's receiving it or an item, and it's often used for healing. And in when you're doing the healing, it's not that the practitioner themselves is so holy and has this power themselves. It's that they are able to merge with the Buddha or Bodhisattva or other kind of celestial being that has this power, and then they are able to kind of channel the power of that being in a sense. And so I think just for ordinary kind of Reiki practice, hands-on practice, where we talk about it coming from the universe, I don't have any like hard, fast evidence of this, but in a sense, right, it seems like it's something, maybe a secularized version of this idea of, this cosmic Buddha or something like that, kind of working through the practitioner. With the second symbol in particular, it derives from a Sanskrit syllable that is a kind of manifestation of, and this is where, some people disagree. It could be either Amida Buddha, who I mentioned before, right, who is the patron Buddha or something of the Pure Land sect. He's the central object of devotion for the Pure Land sect, and he has, infinite compassion for all of humanity and basically wants to relieve all of humanity's suffering in a sense. Or it could be Kanon, if you remember the
Kwantlen,
thousand the
Kanon,
thousand arm, yeah,
yes,
Guan Yin in
yeah.
the Chinese, but the one with particularly the manifestation of Kanon with the thousand arms,
Yes.
the Senju Kanon, um, could also use that same Sanskrit syllable. So whether it's Amida Buddha or Senju Kanon, I have some evidence that it's Amida. I think I feel pretty strong it's Amida, but some people are arguing for Senju Kanon. I'm not going to give them a hard time. One of these Buddhas or Bodhisattvas that has just all this like love for humanity, compassion for humanity, that seems to be what we're in a sense. And again, if you don't know any of this, the Reiki works just fine, right? Is that you don't doesn't
Great.
matter what's in the boxes, but that the second symbol does seem to be related to in its origins one of these Buddhist figures. And so in these mental and emotional treatments, there is this kind of, whether conscious or unconscious manifestation of that power in that particular treatment. And so,
So,
yeah, the Buddhist roots, I think, are
mm,
pretty clear. But then again, you don't need to convert to Buddhism to be a Reiki practitioner,
no,
right?
you just have to take a Reiki class and get an initiation. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Which
Yes.
which again, I think is in a sense a kind of secularized form of the Buddhist initiation
Yes.
practice, the
Beautiful.
esoteric Buddhist religion. Yeah.
So, I know that you know the story. The story that the Reiki Alliance teachers or Takata lineage has supposed to tell at the Reiki classes about
Mhm.
how Usui Mikao Usui searched all the way around the world more or less, and then sat at the mountain of Kurama for 21 days, and on the night to the 21st day, he would fall in a trance and receive. And I don't say in this way to disrespect it, but it's just like to do it in a short way.
Sure.
So I completely go with this. I believe that he sat on that mountain and
Yep.
that he did receive some kind of downloads.
Hmm.
Um, Also because I mean I'm a spiritual medium myself. I know that this is how it works actually
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
But and when people ask me, I'm like, I'm pretty sure Usui Sensei did not get a complete protocol of physical treatments for cancer or whatever. I'm pretty sure that's something that came along later.
Hmm. Right.
But in connection with the symbols, um, which I believe, or also from reading your book and talking with you and doing my own thinking, that the symbols, let's say the first, the second, and the master symbol originates from ancient Buddhism, or they can be found. The
Yeah.
master symbol is a little different, right? It's a combination, I understand, or
Well, the master symbol is a very common Buddhist expression but they're from I think they're from slightly different origins.
mm.
So, as I mentioned, the second symbol is Sanskrit, which actually is in Takata's story,
Yeah,
right? That
he went to India.
He went to the Chinese sutras and he realized this Chinese was a translation of the Sanskrit, so he had to go back to the Sanskrit. And there he found the formula, right? It's like,
Exactly.
and
Yeah,
so I mean, I think even though the story she told is maybe not like literally true in every detail, there are nuggets in
yeah.
there
He
that
gets
I
around
think
everywhere. Yes.
really have historical as well as metaphorical or kind of teaching story value. I think that there are aspects in there that do align with aspects of Reiki history, and yeah, I think that's one of them. So there's this Sanskrit syllable, but then the distance Reiki symbol and the master symbol are both um, based on Chinese characters, right? And the Chinese characters in the master symbol, and actually very, very close to what the master symbol looks like, appears in this volume of ninja magic. And it uses terminology that is kind of Buddhist terminology about like right mindfulness.
Mm.
Different ways of translating it is basically that the foundation is right mindfulness, or your true nature is right mindfulness. and that kind of talismanic writing version of that expression is used to make a connection between the ninja magician and the target of the magic, right? That you
Yes.
like establish
Yeah.
this connection
Yes.
with it, which makes a lot of sense if you do distance Reiki, right? That
Yes.
it's what establishes that connection. And again, this idea of like non-duality, right? If my true nature is right mindfulness and your true nature is right mindfulness, and we're both part of this bigger cosmic unity in a sense, then of course I can access you on the other side of the world to do distance Reiki, right? That we're both you're connecting with them in this kind of foundational aspect of your being, which is not dual, right? Which is connected in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so there's that. And then for the master symbol, it's actually a very common like three character expression, like especially not just the first character, but the second and third characters. It just means enlightenment in some level. I mean, you can
I have
see
a
it.
colleague in Denmark, a Chinese
Yeah.
woman who lives in or trained as a master in Denmark. Her name is in
Oh
the
wow.
master symbol.
Oh wow. Oh wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that
it
is
means,
so
I
funny.
mean, basically, the three characters, it means like great enlightenment in a sense, or great bright light. I mean, that's how they translate it a lot. But this bright light is a
Yes.
way, it's a metaphor for being awakened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
this idea that it needs to be secret, right?
exactly. That's where
On
I
one
want to
level,
go.
okay, so it's like how you actually use it, that I think is not supposed to be transmitted to people who haven't received the initiation, right? The idea, you write in your book about how to do, this and that. I think that does maybe go against the spirit. Again, is that right or wrong? Ethically, I'm not going to judge necessarily, but it does go against what the lineage has done in the past. Like, there's a reason we don't have a ton of materials from Usui Sensei and Hayashi Sensei about how they actually do all the practices and the initiation, because you weren't supposed to write that stuff down, right? I mean, that was definitely the ethic of that time and place. Some people argue, well, now, the world is so messed up. We need as many people to be exposed to this stuff as possible. Okay, I'm
Mm,
not going to get into
mm.
that
No,
debate,
no, no.
but it is clear that, you know, the symbols, how to use them, oh, sorry, how to use the symbols is not necessarily something that's supposed to be given to the uninitiated in the more traditional lineage, kind of way of
Yes.
doing it.
Yes.
At the same time, the symbol itself, I mean, the Sanskrit symbol, you go to a Pure Land cemetery, it's all over the place. I mean, it's or not just a cemetery. I mean, like in they have these kinds of stupas or lanterns sometimes that have the Sanskrit syllables of the Buddhas of the four directions, or the five, it's the five directions, but the one in the middle. But the Buddha of the West is Amida. So his Sanskrit symbol is carved in stone for the whole world to see.
Yes.
The thing that, don't show anybody, don't tell anybody, don't, I mean, it is something you can just Google image, not just the Reiki, if you look up Reiki symbols, of course it's there, but if you just look up, the Bonji Kiriku, it's a widely available thing. And in terms of particularly the master symbol, like you said, I mean, they're very common characters. So I don't think it's that necessarily, there was a kind of long-standing thing. Oh, if you expose the symbol, it's going to lose power or something. It's like I
Or
don't think
something
it's
bad is going to happen. Some
something
people, some
bad.
people say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think that it's people went a little far in that direction of like these are things that you're not necessarily supposed to tell the uninitiated in terms of the mechanics of how to do everything. And, it's supposed to be part of what you learn in Reiki. And, there's a lot written in religious studies about secrets and the circulation of secrets. And then you get some power by having a secret, and then you get some power by writing the secret in your book, and people want to buy your book or whatever. But then it's like, how do you actually do it, right? If you don't have the transmission, then maybe then there's this anxiety, am I doing it? Even if you do have the transmission,
Yeah.
if you have a teacher, did my teacher get the transmission properly? And I think there's a lot of people out there who kind of collect lineages because of that, right? They don't trust that they got the whole story. So,
True.
oh, now I need to go retrain in this other lineage. And
True.
yeah,
I met a guy once from Romania at a Reiki class, different workshop somewhere, and he had 7 master initiations, also from 7 different masters, because he wanted to get the whole thing. And we were like, and his wife were like, yeah, it's like 5 houses we could have bought with all this money. But
wow.
he was like, no, 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 I want it all. I want it all, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, then again, a little bit, I feel like the thing about the boxes is it's like, I've gotten Reiki from people from all these different lineages. I'm sure they were initiated in different ways. The way they draw the symbols might be different. I mean, Reiki's good. Like, I don't, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, again, and I'm someone who also, like, I've learned a lot. I am initiated in some Japanese Reiki lineages. I am initiated in Takata lineage. I have learned a bunch of different things, but like, I don't think that like one style is necessarily like better or like
No, no,
stronger
no,
or
no.
more effective. I mean, that's one thing I would love to see at some point in clinical research. Once they establish Reiki is effective, different types of training, are they good for different
Yes.
types of things or different types of practice? Are they,
That
there's
would be
one,
fun, huh?
I'd love
If
to
we
see
could
that.
do that. That
Yeah.
would be super interesting. But I have, I meet colleagues sometimes, or I meet students from colleagues who tells me that, but my master says that if I do this, if I make I was almost going to do it, but I can't, right, on camera. If I do the symbol like in the wrong direction or the wrong way,
Yeah.
uh, seriously, something bad will happen.
Yeah. 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 No,
Or
I know
if
there's a lot of teachings about essentially the clockwise and the counterclockwise and
Yeah,
the,
and
um,
I'm like,
yeah, I don't
I'm always
know.
really, there's no fear in Reiki. They can't do anything wrong. There won't be a revenge from the universal
Yeah.
life force because you're doing something wrong. You
Right.
just do it, and
Right.
Reiki will flow where it is needed, right?
I think it's also this kind of it brings up this issue of like technique versus I don't know what you want to call it, like intention. I don't know is really the right word, but like that you're the way what you're doing versus like how you're doing it, right? That there are people who get very, very hung up in a sense on, the hand position, right? It needs to be or if you're here versus you're there, right? You're going to have very different, and which might be true. I don't know. I'm just saying that that's kind of one end of the spectrum versus, what's in your heart when you're practicing? What kind of state are you in? And how grounded and grateful and connected are you, right? And that like I think those are kind of like two poles on this spectrum of what are you going to be focusing on? Are you like and I mean some people can go back and forth, right? Am I doing the technique properly? Am I doing it the way I learned it from my teacher? And okay, now the technique is done. Let me, channel and be present and
Yeah,
be
let me
grateful
just
and like,
be that Reiki channel. Yes.
beam love. Yeah, be the Reiki. Be the Reiki. Yeah.
And I try to teach my students the way I do it at the moment. I don't know what I'm going to do in 10 years because I also changed a long time. But I tell them that, I'm trained to do a protocol, right? There is a certain way that we do this for as
Mhm.
a standard protocol. And
Yeah.
I'm like, you do the protocol and then you do what you have to do, where
Yeah.
your hands have to go. Because that way you honor Reiki, you honor that you are not the clever one, you honor that something is more intelligent than us, and you do how you were told, and then you can do all the extra stuff that you just feel like you have to do. And in that way, both ego and spirit is satisfied.
Yeah.
And we give
Well, and
and
I think yeah,
yeah,
and I
and
think
the
maybe part
patient
of the
gets as much
protocol.
as possible, right? The
Oh,
patient
sorry.
gets all the Reiki that
Oh,
he
yeah,
can
yeah.
have. Yes, yeah,
But I think maybe also part of the protocol, rituals are important, right?
yeah,
And to get yourself into that mental state, to get yourself into that, you know, I don't know,
true,
existential state.
true.
Yeah.
But I believe some Westerners, perhaps, I don't know how that is in Japan, but we would like to know, right? And we would like to understand. And so this, I know that this person has cancer and I have to do the right thing. And I really try to encourage the thing about let go of trying to direct and control and
Yeah.
let Reiki flow because we don't know.
Right.
But yeah, but that's just my way of teaching it.
Well, and
But
then Takata also, she really emphasized this thing about cause and effect, and that you don't just want to treat the effect, you want to treat the cause. Because if you
exactly.
if you remove the effect and you don't treat the cause, it's going to come back in some other way.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, I think, in part about I mean, there's this, talk about the difference between Japanese Reiki and Takata style Reiki. One of the things is about, trying to use the byosen, where you kind of scan and you find the spot where there's the vibrations and you treat that spot, versus the foundation treatment, right? And I think the thing with Takata with the foundation treatment is it's not necessarily supposed to be the end all be all, right? It's a foundation, right? You build on a foundation, right? It's not just the foundation necessarily.
Yes. Yes.
But with the foundation, you're gonna be treating, it's like a catch-all, right? Even no matter what, you're going to be treating all the major organs, all the major glands. That in theory, you're going to find the place that's the cause, and she talked about holism, right? That the patient is a whole. So when you have the time, when you have the ability to treat the whole person. And so, yeah, again, I think people want to argue that their way of doing things is the best way, but I think that they both work on some level, right? That they
Yes. Yeah. Let's
yeah.
put that,
And
let's leave it
and the other
there.
thing, I mean, there's a lot in Takata I think that people forget. She also said you want to treat people on successive days, right? She said, ideally, especially for a chronic problem, 4 days in a row,
Yes.
right, for treatment. And so, yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of things where, like, I feel like people don't really know what she taught, and then they criticize her teachings. And yeah,
True. I
yeah,
teach 4 days in a row. I teach my students, I tell them that in the perfect world, and traditionally, you would do 4 days in a row in order to expect some kind of change
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But then people like in our days, oh, but I
It's hard.
can't come 4 days in a row,
I
right? And
know,
then
I know,
so
it's
so
hard.
I usually recommend that for my students who want to be professional practitioners, they of course have second degree Reiki as well, and then you can mix it because then you can have your client in your clinic for a physical Reiki, and then you can do distant Reiki
It's
for those
yeah,
days, and then they come back, and that kind of does the trick. But I'm still on that one. I tell people that
that's good. That's
four
good.
days in
Yeah,
a
but
row.
also, I mean, like you said though, it's a different time too.
Yeah.
And so um yeah, I mean when Takata the thing is though, she would also get on people, listen, your health is number one. If you don't have your health, you can't work and you're gonna be poor. So, you have to invest in your health. I mean, she was very yeah,
True.
I don't
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
know.
But in connection with so I'm just a little bit. I have a question more about the symbols. Um, so the symbols originates in Asia, Sanskrit, Buddhism, something like that. And the Western Reiki tradition really honors the symbols. They are sacred, they are secret, they are not to be shown or shared or anything. And the masters teach the more you honor them, the better they will work for you, right? That's the
Mm,
that's
mm,
the how I'm supposed to tell it.
okay.
So then when we go to Japan, where I guess the symbols are more or less or have more or less been part of everyday beliefs or traditions or whatever. Are they considered as sacred and secret as Western Reiki looks at them?
I mean, I think, like I was saying before, it's not necessarily the form of the symbol itself, because like you said, right, they can be common
Mm.
um, symbols that you see, especially in Buddhist temples or things like that. But I think it's more like how you use them should not be shared with the
Yeah.
uninitiated,
Okay.
right?
Great.
Yeah.
Yes, we talked about that. And it reminds me that we went when I was with you in Japan, we went to the Mount Hiei
Hmm.
in that early morning ceremony. And we're sitting there, and after the ceremony, there is a monk talking to a group of Japanese visitors or tourists. And I'm just sitting there, contemplating, sensing the energy. And I hear him. I mean, I don't speak Japanese, right? But I hear those specific words of the first and the second symbol, the
Hmm.
power and the yeah, first and second symbol. And I'm like, what is he talking about? And I was looking for you. It's like, but and I just it was so clearly like these names came out, the name of the symbols, and like, yeah, because they're just here. They're just part of a bigger thing, and they're not specific Reiki, holy Reiki symbols that are cut off from the rest of the world. And it was, yeah. Well,
Yeah, well, I think there's some element of that too, where it's, becomes like exoticized or foreign,
yes.
and um, yeah, whereas maybe for people from the cultural background, right, there's a different kind of vibration or
Yeah.
valence for that, right?
Yeah.
You're not just learning nonsense words, right? You're learning like it's an actual
Yeah.
thing in your own language. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, we get time is flying here when we're talking, right? But I have one more thing I really would like us to just get around the self-practice
Mhm.
versus the Hatsureiho.
Yeah. Okay. So Hatsudeho, for people who don't know that term, is a kind of meditative practice that was taught in early Usui Reiki Ryoho, right before Hawaii Takata kind of adapted it for American audiences, and it involves some proper you know posture, right? Sitting up straight, originally, kneeling on the ground, involves, meditation, visualization, kind of breathing and visualization together. And yeah, I think it's a very nice practice. I like doing it myself. And it's supposed to, I think, connect the practitioner with this like cosmic source, and then bring together and so receiving the kind of cosmic energy or what have you, Reiki, into one's lower abdomen, right? The place called like the hara, or the tanden, right below the
Mm.
navel, and then linking the source and there, so it's kind of macrocosm, microcosm, right? And then linking the tanden or hara with the hands, right, which are in the
Gotcha.
last part of Hatsudeho are held in gasho or prayer position. And so linking the source, the lower abdomen, the tanden, and the hands. And then from there, right, then there can be what's called like reiji after Hatsudeho, which is a kind of self-treatment as well.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I never
yeah.
experienced that. Only that they yeah did the dry brushing, the breathing from tandem,
Yep.
and
Then
then
after Hatsudeho, yeah, there can be a kind of self-treatment as well because your hands are like very activated at that point,
mm,
right? Um, And also also as part of Hatsudeho, the chanting of the poetry of the Meiji Emperor
yes, the
as a way of like
precepts.
purify. Well, not just the precepts, the poetry of the Meiji Emperor, the Gyosei,
Hmm.
um, and purifying the heart mind, but also the precepts, right, is another practice in Gasho of purifying the heart mind. Um, and yeah, that with this pure heart, right, with this connection with the source,
Yes.
right, your hands are so activated, and you'll be a good channel for Reiki. Mrs. Takata, you know, I think partly maybe in the uh, practical nature of being a teacher of a spiritual practice in wartime Japan, at wartime Hawaii, where, doing things like this could get you arrested and put in, prison for being a, you know, Japanese spiritual leader, during a time where the US was at war with Japan. Um, I don't know if that's when she stopped teaching this. It could be. Um, that's one of the kind of mysteries I have, is like, when did she stop teaching Hatsudeho? Because I'm pretty sure she learned it under Hayashi. Um, but it seems that she felt like it really wasn't necessary, that you receive your initiations, and you have that connection. You don't need to reconnect with Hatsudeho on the regular. But she did say that if you're feeling run down, if you're feeling like you don't have that connection, treat your abdomen, right? That she did say like
True.
one, two, three,
Yes.
four, right? The hand positions on your abdomen is then you're going to charge your battery, right? She talked about the battery, the lower abdomen, the tanden is like a battery. And if you're not feeling connected, charge your battery, treat your belly. And so in a sense, um, you don't need to sit up kneeling in proper posture. You
Yeah.
don't, they don't have all the same kind of bodily positions or visualization necessarily that's taught in Hatsudeho. But I think, and she had a lot of experience as a practitioner and as a teacher. Um, she felt like doing self-treatment on your belly has the same effect as doing the Hatsudeho practice. So,
It's
I,
just
who am I?
easier. Yes.
And it's a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would love a study of practitioners who do daily Hatsudeho versus practitioners who do daily self-treatment and see what's coming out of their hands. Unfortunately, we're not at a point where we're seeing,
We would
basically
measure the
lightning
radiance from
bolts.
their
Yeah,
hands.
yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have
Yeah.
that yet,
Yeah.
but
No, because
we'll,
I have a student who changed or took me as her master, even though she had been initiated into another lineage. And that other master taught her students to do Hatsure Ho, but
Mhm,
not self-treatment.
mhm.
And the students started coming with me for personal sessions, and I knew she had Reiki, so it's like, so do you do your self practice every day? And she was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And then she eventually she took Reiki. She took first degree and second degree with me again, and she said, no, we never practiced that. So I guess that along the way, some teachers have like divided it up. It's either or, but of course we don't know that. I do. I teach Hatsure Ho on other occasions. Like a couple of times a year, I will do like a summer Reiki day, a summer day with Reiki or a Christmas Reiki or whatever. And there
Mhm.
will be, and I will say, so we will do this Reiki meditation, which is called Hatsure Ho, and just to let them know that this was also a part of the original
Yeah.
tradition. And some people
Well,
love it, and others find it's too complicated.
yeah, yeah. No, again, it's, I think, different. Yeah, different teachings obviously appeal to different types of people, different flavors. But interesting, and I can actually plug something I have coming up. So there's a book by a Japanese Reiki practitioner that was published in 1933 called his name was Tomita Kaiji, and that we have a translation of the full book coming out in English. I think next month, or I don't know exactly when this podcast is going to air, but I think the date is we're talking about for February, 2024.
Yes,
Um,
25,
and
25.
oh yeah, thank you.
It was a little
Just
New
it
Year's
just
thing.
changed the new year. I'm still writing the wrong
Yeah.
year on
So
my
we
check.
think it will come out in
20,
February 25.
February 2025.
Yes.
Reiki and the Benevolent Art of Healing by Kaiji Tomita. And in his book, so he learned probably under Usui Sensei. It may have been under Ushida, who became the second president of the Usui Ryoho Gakkai, but he was a member of the Usui Ryoho Gakkai in Osaka in the 1920s. Like he was really at the beginning. And in his book, he doesn't have initiation at all. He just has Hatsureho.
Oh,
And he says basically, if you do enough Hatsureho, he has like you kind of ramp up over the course of a week to doing like 45 minutes to an hour at a time, and especially in the gasho position, he says you're going to get the power to do the hands-on healing. And so it's like, there's a lot of different variety of practices out there. I mean, he was like the first, in a sense, the first book that was like, initiate yourself into Reiki. But there's something about it. And also I found, it's in my book just briefly, um, this practitioner in Hawaii who his mother-in-law had learned under Hawaii Takata, and she says she learned the Gasho meditation and that they did that in class every day. And he really wanted his mother-in-law to initiate him, and she couldn't initiate him. She like was trying and she
oh
couldn't
my
because she
goodness.
never learned it.
No.
But then he started doing the Gasho meditation every day, and he started getting the Reiki power, he said. And
Wow.
so
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, if
But true.
try it out if you want.
Yeah, I know I'll look for that one, but it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense in the way that what I also teach, which is not Reiki, but I teach these tools, energetic tools,
Yeah.
like meditative tools, and I know that if you use them every day, your powers, whatever your higher wisdom, your connection with spirit, suddenly you know more, you feel more, you can sense more. It's the continuity of connecting on a daily basis to a higher
Yeah.
frequency that will make
Yeah.
miracles happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever. So, well, thank you so much, Justin. It's been
Yeah, no, a real
so
pleasure.
enjoyed. Yeah, we could continue for a long while, I know. As is tradition on my podcast, and I warned you about this already, right? Before we close off, I'm gonna ask you to please to say the five precepts in the manner that is most suited for you, so that we can hear your actually the word that comes up, your love for the tradition coming through the precepts. So I will
Sure.
invite you to say the precepts, and then we will and turn it off. Hmm?
Okay. Can I say it first in Japanese and then in English? Is
Yes,
that
that would be lovely. Please go
okay?
ahead.
Okay. Well, the way I was taught to do it in Japanese, the hands in prayer position.
Yes.
多少、今日だけは怒るな、心配すな、感謝して行を励め、人に親切に。And it is just for today. Don't anger, don't worry, be grateful. Do your work well, be kind to people.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. And then
thank you.
something comes up anyway that I have to say, even though I said we were going to be finished now, because we were on the Kurama Mountain together. We were at the
Mm.
top of the tree trunk where we believe that Usui Sensei sat for 21 days. And you set out, you said the precepts out loud with the group, and I said them in Danish as well.
Yeah.
And then couple of days later, a week later, I meet someone who was with us, not a part of our group, but who was with the group there. And she looks at me and she says, when you said the precepts, I could sense everything was moving. And I thought, wow. So she wasn't actually part of the circle as I understood, but she was standing right next
Mhm.
to us. And you said the precepts and in Japanese, and I said them in Danish. And she was just like, I could sense this thing was something was happening, something was working.
Mm.
And the reason why I always ask my guests to say the precepts as at the end of the talk is that the podcast originally started when my master knew that she was transitioning in a couple of months.
Hmm.
And we were recording her story of Reiki, her masterhood. And the first recording we do, I ask her, would you please say the precepts? And it was just like an idea that came to me. And I'm sitting in her office, in her private home, and she says them out loud. And it was as if the entire office was like enlightened. And you
Mm.
could almost sense everything was just with such high power and energy of this old master saying the precepts. And I was
Mm.
like, wow, this I have to remember this. Even though it might not be the same every time, but we should end every talk on the podcast with the five precepts.
Love
So
it.
to honor that. Yes. So once again, thank you, Justin, for joining me today. And for those who are watching, I will show the book again. You should read Justin's book if you're interested in Reiki. It's not an easy read if you're not English first language English, but you will get the picture anyway. And I can highly
And
recommend it.
I want to say one thing for people who don't find it an easy read. It's okay to skip around a little bit. Like you don't have to read every single word.
True.
The chapter one where we get the childhood of Hawaii Takata, and then I talk about the history of Japanese immigration to Hawaii and the history of the sugar plantations. If you're not interested in the history of Hawaii sugar plantations, you don't have to read that part. Feel free to skip ahead 2 pages
I
and
might
go.
have skipped a page or two there after a while, Justin. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
It's
thank you for that. Yes.
yeah, it's for a bunch of different types of audiences. It's part of it is for Reiki practitioners, part of it is for people in my different fields of academia. So if you're a Reiki person, you can just read the Reiki parts. That's fine. And
Yes.
the other thing is in the back, in the endnotes, there's some Easter eggs in there, as we say in English, that there's some hidden treasures that if you're really interested in the Reiki history, there's some stuff in the endnotes that's not in the main text that you might be interested in. So it's worth flipping back and forth a
You
little
have to
bit.
go to the end
I
page.
know, I know. It's
The
one of those
treasure.
hidden treasures. Yeah, it's worth the effort, I think. Yeah. But I'm a nerd. I love that stuff. So and again, maybe not for everybody, but if you are interested in that stuff, it's worth flipping to the back and finding some of those treasures.
Okay, we will do that. Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much. I look forward to continuing the talk another time. And
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation.